It is written in the book of Ephesians, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the powers, against the work forces of this darkness, against spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places." In today's opulent generation, a lot of people are desensitized to spiritual warfare and demonic entities by cheesy television shows about teens combating the supernatural and movies glamorizing forces of darkness. While some accept it as a fact, we truly cannot grasp the weight of its reality. So how should we respond? How do we engage in this spiritual battle beyond simply studying it? To help us answer some of these questions, joining me today is Father Vincent Banker, a Catholic priest who has been doing exorcism for the past 10 years in Nashville, Tennessee. My name is Adam, and you're listening to Like Mars on Earth. There was actually a time when the devil would convince you that he never existed. But if you look in some of the biggest stages of the world today, like the Grammys, you have the celebrities coming in devil costumes. It's almost like the devil's trying to be brazen about his existence. But people still don't believe it, which is very interesting. And what's even more interesting to me is the fact that when I talk to people about their political opinions about day-to-day policies and cultures, they always have something or the other to say. But I get a lot of pushback the moment I mention, things like angels or demons or anything about spirituality. And, when I mention about these things like the devil, people just stop me and like, come on, man, Adam, now you're just being fantastical. This is just crazy talk. You're talking about things that don't exist. But these things do exist, right?
They do. I mean, if you're a Christian, any Christian, and you follow the scriptures, we know there was a war in heaven, and Lucifer, the most brilliant and the most beautiful of the angels, rebelled because of the plan for the Son, the Word, to become flesh. And he was horrified that God would lower himself to our nature. And so he said, "I will not serve." And he was cast out with his minions, and they became the fallen angels, the demons, and they were cast down to earth.
Right.
And soon thereafter, Eve encountered the serpent, and that was the beginning of our demise. And so this is not mythical. This is fact. The devil is a real person, a person in the sense of having a will and an intellect. He's a spirit, but he's a person. And what you said is true, that he used to be very hidden and he used to be very subtle. And it should worry people that he's suddenly not worried about being seen. Because that means it's what most people would deduct from that is that he realizes that his reign is coming to a close and he's using everything he has now to try to drag as many people down with him so we can be miserable in hell too.
Right. So I believe this. But what would you say to someone who doesn't believe this and is more of a skeptic towards all this spirituality and angels and demons and everything related to it?
That would be a lot to risk. So just on basic common sense, it would be good to do your research a little deeper before you come to the conclusion, because I would say you don't believe, but do you really understand? Have you done any investigation into this? Have you read? Have you researched? Have you looked?
Right. But there could be a very big possibility that a lot of the possession cases that have been documented and projected on screen and in movies and other stuff, but could be more to do with mental or psychological disorder, right? And not something to do with spiritual warfare.
If you were an exorcist and you watch someone levitate off a couch, and I can't put that into the DSM manual classification of a psychological disorder,
right?
You'd have to say something's happening here. There might be something beyond what I believe. So I would say maybe do your research a little more before you come to that conclusion.
Um, you've seen someone levitate off a couch?
I have. In America, so the USCCB, that's our governing body of bishops, we're the only body of bishops that require, before we do the rite of exorcism, the person has to have both a physical checkup and a psychological exam. Psychological exams are expensive. They're about $2,000. So, and we don't charge the victim because they're already suffering and they often don't have the resources. They've lost their home, their job, usually their wife, husband. But we require that because the law says that I have to have moral certitude that the devil is present. And to do that, we have to rule out psychological problems and all this. Okay. When I saw the man levitate off the couch, in all countries, the exorcist needs moral certitude to perform an exorcism that there is the presence of the demon. But like I said, in America, we have to do those 2 tests to rule out other things. So when I saw this young man levitate off the couch, well, there's my moral certitude that this is not a psychological problem because that can't force someone to come out of the chair on their own. So I have a team. I always have other people with me. Often it's another priest. So we're all seeing the same thing, you know. They can speak languages that they've never known. They know things about you or other people in the room that they couldn't know. So these are the hallmarks of how we would determine, is this really a demon? Supernatural knowledge of things they could not know, languages they have not learned that they can speak fluently, and superhuman strength. I remember there was a little nun, about 100 pounds, 5 foot. I won't mention the order. And when she was going through a deliverance, it took 6 large men my size to hold her down. And that's what I mean. It's not possible that that little girl could have that strength. So we look at these things as kind of the hallmarks of this is not normal. This is a supernatural thing. I've seen that same nun run up a 20-foot wall like a squirrel. And 2,000 people at a conference saw it too. So
Wait, what?
there's the proof that that's not right. Can we all agree that's not normal? And it's scary when you see it because he
Yeah.
likes to inflame fear in people's hearts.
So how does it all start? Like, or where does it all start?
Like as human beings, we're spiritual persons incarnate in a body,
Yeah.
right? And that's one person together. So what affects the spirit is going to affect the body. What affects the body affects the spirit. And when we amass sins, particularly if they're grave sins, over a long period of time, in particular, there are demons that hook into us and they harass us and they follow each other in packs. And so often, it's like a snowball going down a hill. I just did this and then I did that. And then I went to this sin. And then all of a sudden, here I am and I'm
Really lost
in a
and
bad
possessed.
place. That's what they're doing. They're pushing you to keep going further into your sinfulness.
Right. So sin is the base of all possession. What can people do to protect themselves or prevent themselves from going down that rabbit hole?
Yeah. Well, we also believe we have an angel assigned to us, a guardian angel. That angel has a lot of power, but the more you acknowledge the angel and ask for his help, the more power he can give you. So I tell people every morning, wake up, thank God for the new day, thank a song of gratitude, and then turn to your angel and say, I appreciate your help today. And these are the things I struggle with. These are the appointments today I think going to be difficult, the meetings I have. Can you be there and intercede for me through these things? You'd be surprised how different your day goes. And if you surrender to the day and not push for getting things your way, because we frequently think, I have to have it this way. But then if you let it go and see what God's going to do, if you've given him permission over the day, he will wrap it up in a way so much more clean, neat, and tidy than you could ever imagine that you could do. But these are, but you have to do it to test it, right? So some people say, I don't believe in that, I'm not going to do it. Well, then you're going to miss out. We can only lead you to the water. So you have your angel, but then you have these demons. Now the demons, their number one job is to get you to sin. When most people talk about demons, they think of the Exorcist movie, the devil with the horns and the spear. He can appear that way, but 96, 7% of his work is to tempt to sin and all of his minions. Because when we sin, we break away from God. And once we break away from God, then they can really go after us. Like it's like there's a pit bull with a 5-foot chain. It's like stepping in to the 3-foot mark. You're suddenly now in the zone, right? Then they can really attack you. So if they can get you to sin, then they can really have a field day and really ruin your life.
Let me make a little confession here. I'm a movie buff and I love movies since a very early age. And I've also seen a lot of horror films. And in all these horror movies, you have this house and you have this family that moves into this house. And all of a sudden, things start happening which are supernatural. They can't explain what's happening and yada, yada, yada. At the end of the film, there's like a full on possession. And that's mostly to do with the mother or one of the kids or the dad. Like the Amityville horror, that was where the dad goes nuts. But how do you know? And in fact, most of these movies actually blame it on the house. That the house was built on this cemetery or this, torture chamber, prison years back, and was demolished, and it belonged to this old lady, old witch, or something like that. So how do you know that there is an infestation in your house or the place you work at?
Vexation and infestation is normally things that happen in somebody's home or in their space. It doesn't have to be the home. It could be the office, wherever, the car, where the devil can manipulate, move things, create chaos, losing car keys constantly, the computer constantly. Whenever I try to print a homily, it only jams for the homily, or it only jams when I'm printing out a prayer. That would be like, I'm like, oh yeah, so I have to take authority over that spirit of blockage. And then it just goes right through. But they can be bad. Like the Amityville horror would be the worst example of a vexation of a home. And then you have the person himself. So an obsession, a spirit of obsession attacks the mind. And people who have this sort of attack, it's the most horrible attack. They can't think. They have voices screaming at them all day, screaming blasphemies, putting horrible thoughts in their head, visions of suicide, and they can't sleep. So then they're even more in a bad way. They often will wind up in a mental hospital, but it's not a mental problem. It's a demon problem. And then oppression is attacks to the body. That could be through sickness, or in the worst cases I've seen, somebody who lives alone wakes up with bite marks all over the body, or scratch marks, or, in the worst cases, you see people who will vomit things that are odd, like frogs or nails. I've only seen that when I went to exorcism school. I haven't seen it firsthand. But this is all possible in the realm of evil, because they can imitate the power of God, but it's short-lived and it's not as powerful. Then if these things escalate and they kind of meld together, it would lead to a full-on possession where the demon, usually Satan himself, will take possession of the body. People think that they take the soul. You can't take the soul. You can't sell your soul. You know why you can't sell your soul? You can't sell what you don't own. But he'll trick you into thinking that, and then that puts the person into despair.
So are you saying that all those accounts of or reports of musicians and celebrities, exchanging their soul for fame and fortune, that's just hogwash? It's not true.
Yep. Yeah, when you make a deal with the devil, it's an invitation, and he takes the invitation very seriously. He comes right in. One of the worst cases I've ever heard was from the exorcism of New York City back about 15 years ago. He was telling me, well, it would have been longer than that, maybe 20, 25. There was a woman, a young girl at Juilliard, a violinist, and she was about to graduate. She was brilliantly talented, but all of her friends were getting job offers and she had none. And her friends remember always hearing her say the words, "I would do anything to be famous." Well, guess who's listening? Your angel's listening, but also there's other things in the room. And it wasn't long after that she went to bed one night, had a dream, And she said in the dream was the most beautiful man she'd ever seen, naked, another sign, calling card of the devil. And he said, do you really want fame and power? And she said, I do. And he produced a contract, and he took his finger and slashed her finger and had her sign it in her blood. And then he touched the contract and it burst into flames and the ashes fell on the floor. So pretty easy to understand what happened, right?
Oh boy. Yeah, she just let the devil in.
Right. So when you wake up from that dream and you remember it, you might take a pause and be like, I don't think that was a good thing. But what's worse is her finger was cut and the ashes were next to the bed. So she still doesn't say anything. So within a couple of weeks, she signs this multinational tour, makes a ton of money, becomes very popular and famous on this circuit. And within a few years, she gets involved with drugs, goes to needles, gets HIV. Now she's dying in a New York hospital. And this whole thing comes back to how this started. And she calls her Filipino mother and tells her the story. And mommy calls the chancery, hysterical. I need an exorcist right away for my daughter. So Jim is the exorcist. He shows up and they tell him the whole story from the dream forward. And he says, okay, well, that's not good. You signed a blood covenant with the devil. So I'm going to need you to break that with the blood covenant. So you're going to write out the whole creed and then you're going to sign it in your blood. Well, the doctor's like, she has AIDS. She's not signing anything in blood. Not going to happen. And he says, well, then you need to step out of the room because she needs to do this. And she did do it. And she signed the contract, the creed, and she signs it. And she convulses and flatlines and dies. So now the doctor comes back and he's really upset. The mother is out of her mind. They're all blaming the priest. Hysteria goes on for about 10 minutes. And then all of a sudden she jumps up off the table. She's back. No HIV, no AIDS. She's completely healed.
Oh.
And so she then committed for the rest of her life to only do music that would honor God and to tell people about the reality of the devil and not to make deals with him.
That's a wild story. So I know we're running out of time, so I just wanted to end with one last encounter that you actually mentioned before we started recording, which I actually found it very, very interesting because it kind of reminded me of the Stephen King novel 1408, and I was like, wow, this is like exactly like that. So I just wanted you to maybe narrate that incident that once more for our listeners, and we can call it a day.
There was a priest who was a very big impact on my life, who was a theologian who was frequently on these big panels discussing theology with other theologians. And one of the other theologians had mentioned how he doesn't believe in the devil in his talk. And so then the man I know got up and he said, well, I have to address that right away because this is scriptural, first of all. So like, if you don't believe the scriptures, I don't know how you ever became a priest. And then went through a few other things and then said, finished his talk, gave his talk, done. Afterwards, he went up to the priest and said, I'm going to pray for you in a way that you'll come to believe in the devil. And they were all staying at this retreat house. And that night, there were shrieks coming from that priest's room. And when they ran to see what was wrong, and he let them in, he said, the devil came tonight. And now I believe.
Thank you, Father Vincent. Well, that's all for today's episode of Like Mars on Earth, where we explore the absurdities of everyday life on Earth. We hope you've enjoyed this dose of therapy and are inspired to share your own funny or crazy stories with us. Remember, whether it's a misadventure at a grocery store or a hilarious mishap on a first date, we want to hear it all. So don't be shy, send us your tales of woe, and we'll feature them in our next episode. Who knows? Your story could be the next big thing on Like Mars on Earth. Until then, keep smiling and laughing, even if it feels like it's from another planet. Thanks for tuning in. This is Adam, and I'll see you next time.